So hello everyone, I hope you're doing well today. I'd like to introduce myself and welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on role of organizational ombuds in an academic setting. This webinar is one in a series of webinars addressing topics aligned with the School of Professional Studies Masters of Science program in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution. My name is Andy Hummer. I'm an advisor at the School of Professional Studies and I will be facilitating some of our conversations today. I encourage you to utilize the Q&A function as you develop questions during our presentation. At the end of today's session, we will be addressing some of the questions you share. We will not be using the chat box function for this webinar, so please let us know of any questions via the Q&A box. I would also like to share with the group that today's session is being recorded and will be made available to you for your convenience. At this time, I'd like to welcome today's presenters. Joining us today is Dr. Beth Fisher-Yoshida, Academic Director for the MS in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program. Along with Dr. Beth Fisher-Yoshida, we have Ms. Joan Waters, Columbia University's Ombuds Officer, where she provides independent, impartial, and confidential services for the entire Columbia community of students, faculty, and staff on all campuses. Hello, Beth and Joan. How are you guys today?
Hi, Andy. Fine. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Great. So we can get started and go to the first slide, please, Joan. I'm going to set the context for more of what Joan's going to be talking about today, and I'm doing it from the lens of just, let's say, being a conflict resolution practitioner or somebody who might intervene in a situation or somebody who might be having a conflict, and then looking at different ways of which intervention could happen. So if we're thinking about systems, we can think about our family systems, we can think about an organizational system, and we can think about a university setting as also being a type of organization. And so we might have a range of interventions we might be able to do ourselves or with somebody else in terms of preventing a conflict from occurring. So I might be a coach and I might be doing conflict coaching where I can coach somebody through a situation to help them work themselves out of a conflict. I might lead a workshop doing some training so that people can learn some good communication, negotiation, and conflict resolution skills. And I might actually negotiate directly if I do have a conflict and I do want to resolve it on a one-to-one basis. I also might coach somebody on how to negotiate his or her own conflict. And then, of course, if I can't do something myself for some reason, there's some kind of blockage, I don't feel I have the skills, the conflict is too escalated and I can't do it myself, then I'm really looking for a third-party intervener to help in the situation. And in that sense, we might have somebody come in and do mediation. And if you're familiar with mediation, there are a whole range of types of mediation that we might do. If we can't resolve it then, it might go to arbitration and so on and so forth, going further away from direct involvement in resolving the conflict to having a decision sort of put upon you because you weren't able to get to some kind of resolution and so on. And it depends on the type of conflict. Sometimes we do want to go through the legal system because maybe it's a class action suit and maybe there's just a benefit to the larger society by having something litigated, for example. And so there could be a direct intervention or a third-party intervention, and there's a whole range of ways in which third-party interventions can happen. So the role of the ombuds is one type of intervention, and I'm going to turn it over to Joan now, and she will talk more specifically about the work she does and introduce some of that. So, Joan?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you to you, Beth, for this opportunity, and to Andy for facilitating this as well. As stated, I'm the University Ombuds Officer here at Columbia. And today what I think I'm just going to basically talk about is who we are, how we're organized at Columbia, and what it is that we do as a resource for the Columbia community. So the Columbia University Ombuds Office was established in 1991. If we start very basically with the origin of the word ombuds and ombudsman, it's a Swedish word from the 1800s. Ombudsman is a gender neutral word, but here in the US we've really been moving towards shortening it to a much more basic ombuds, and that's what Columbia uses. But you'll see the word ombudsman, ombuds, You'll even see the word ombudsperson in different places. Columbia established its office in 1991, and it was pioneered by Marcia Wagner, who held that position until 2013. Marcia Wagner was also very instrumental in the establishment of I guess, making more robust the International Ombudsmen's Association, which is the organization that really holds the principles and ethics for ombuds and holds the standards by which we practice. Currently at Columbia, there are 3 full-time staff members in the Ombuds office. I am one of 2 of the organizational Ombuds officers. My background is in law and higher education. I've served in a judicial capacity. I have mediation and collaborative law training and experience, coaches training, and I've been certified as a certified organizational ombuds practitioner, or co-op, by the International Ombudsmen's Association. And I've been at Columbia for about 5 years now. My colleague, Marilyn Molina, serves as the other ombuds organizational ombuds officer. Marilyn's background is in management at Columbia University, and she possesses a master's degree from the program that Beth is the director of, Negotiation and Conflict Resolution. Marilyn has obtained mediation training, and she's in the process of obtaining her co-op certification, which should come pretty soon in the next few months. She's been at Columbia for more than 10 years and with our office for about 3. The third member of our team is Jamie Batista, who serves as our administrative manager. She's our outreach coordinator and our data specialist. She's been at Columbia for more than 13 years and with our office for about 2. So moving forward to what it is and how it is that we work, we are organized under the 4 principles, and we adhere to them, that the IOA has established. And those are independence, informality, impartiality, and confidentiality. So looking at the first 2, the independence, our office reports directly to President Bollinger, and there are no academic or administrative involvements in our office, so that we can maintain, to the extent that possible, we are university employees, an independence from the politics, so to speak, of other offices. We don't keep records for the university, so when we take notes, if we take notes, those are our notes, and we keep them under lock and key and shred them usually within a few weeks of when we meet with an individual. What's critical to our independence is that we are not authorized to accept notice for the university. So unlike most university employees who are agents of notice for the university, you're speaking to us essentially as individuals, and how to get information to Columbia so that Columbia can do an investigation or take action is one of the things that we can help an individual with, but it won't happen by virtue of meeting with us. The informality, we don't participate in formal proceedings. We don't conduct investigations or file reports. If we did, we would be potentially a classical ombuds, but as organizational ombuds, we do not engage in the formal proceedings at the university. We can help guide someone to the offices that do accept notice, that are required to accept notice, and who do conduct those kind of investigations and reports. So we're impartial, so we're not advocates. Again, there are types of ombuds that are advocates, and that would be something you might be more familiar with in the healthcare setting, where an ombuds in a hospital is more akin to a patient advocate and making sure that a patient receives the type of care or information that they are entitled to. We're neutrals, so we don't advocate for either or any party in an action or in a dispute. Our role is really to identify options and resources and to help the individual or visitor who comes to our office to see things from other perspectives and to maybe see resources that they weren't aware of or that they didn't see applying to their issue. Now, the way that all of these four can work together is with that, what I call the final element of confidentiality. And that is an agreement between the Ombuds officer and the individual who comes to our office that our discussion will not be disclosed to anyone. So what it does is we're agreeing that the fact that we spoke and what we discussed won't be disclosed. It gives us each a freedom to be as creative and forthright as possible to help identify those issues and those resources. And it gives the visitor the option to think out loud and to have a conversation with someone where there won't be repercussions. As it says here, often the opportunity to vent and to speak without filters that so often we have to have when we're in the workplace. And the main exception is if we believe that there's a risk of imminent harm. So if we believe there's an immediate risk of imminent harm, serious harm, we get to use our discretion, our judgment as to who needs to know what about the what we're hearing and to what extent. So those are the four principles that work together as we try to help the individual navigate their particular concern. So who are our visitors? At Columbia, we serve the entire university community, faculty, students, staff, and what we call affiliates. So that can be someone who owns a store off campus and is having a problem with a member of the Columbia community, a vendor, a parent, a member of our alumni. So it's a large community that has the ability to avail themselves of our services. We serve everyone on every campus. So right now, Columbia has 4 campuses that are, within a half mile to 2 miles to 10 miles of each other. And that would require Marilyn and myself to travel sometimes in the same day to 1, 2, or 3 campuses. I don't know if either of us has done all 4 campuses in one day yet. I know I haven't. So that keeps us very busy and keeps us on the move. In the 5 years that I've run the office, we've had a steady increase in visitors year over year. And last year, I think we're looking at numbers about 575 to 600 individuals, and about a third of those people returned for additional visits. The breakdown of faculty, students, and staff has been pretty consistent over the last 5 years, and that's about 40% staff, about 40% graduate and PhD students, and then about 10% each of faculty and undergraduate students. So why would someone at the Columbia community want to visit our office? Here are some common reasons. Assistance in managing a conflict with a peer or a manager. Again, when you're having a problem with a peer, it's very difficult to have someone objective to speak to within your work unit. You might not want to spread your concerns around. You might not want to be seen as gossiping, or it might not just be productive. Same with, how do I discuss this with my manager? If you've encountered a problem that is sensitive and you're not sure how you should resolve it, going to the wrong person initially could determine the outcome before you realize you've gone to the wrong person. So one of the things that we like to say is we are never the wrong place to start, because we can, like the center of the wheel, be a referral mechanism to other offices. And the process is we get to help demystify some of the more formal offices. So, for example, the Office of Equal Opportunity at Columbia is a place where someone who feels that they are experiencing discrimination or observing discrimination in the university setting can go and file a complaint. So what does it look like and feel like when you file a complaint at the Office of Equal Opportunity? How does that unfold, and what does that path look like? That's something that we can discuss, and we do discuss with individuals who come to our office. So some of the ways that we help individuals who come through our office is we listen, we help identify, here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different offices or individuals that you can go to speak to. And sometimes all of those options are not acceptable for whatever reason or reasons to the individual. So we can lay out all of the different options. We can listen, we can refer, we can coach. So sometimes it's, I don't know how to speak to my supervisor about this, or I have a peer whose behavior in the office is disruptive or distracting to me. How do I have that conversation without destroying the relationship or making a bad situation worse? And we can help role play. We can help identify what that might look like. Very often we get individuals, employees, who have been given a performance evaluation that they're not pleased with, whether they disagree with the information or they feel that it's taken out of context. And so how can that individual either repair their work environment, their work situation, or correct a situation? And who can they go to? Manager, HR, or another resource. So those are all the conversations that we can discuss. And very often people just come because they just want to speak to another person who's not involved in this situation, to just get maybe sometimes a reality check. So these are common topics that we see in an academic setting at an ombuds office. And I think it's fairly consistent with other ombuds offices in academic settings, especially in a large R1 institution such as Columbia. So this is something that we suggest that we provide to various departments, organizations, to help people identify why come to the office of the ombuds when you've got an issue. And it shows some of the main areas that we see and that we experience, and how we can help untangle and, as I said, demystify these issues. At this point, it's important to mention that Marilyn and I are always meeting with the individual and listening for the individual concerns that that person has brought and the impact that it's going to have on them and their relationship with the university while they're here. But we're also listening to the concerns that are brought to us from a systemic perspective. Because part of our mandate, in addition to meeting with individuals and helping them untangle these situations and get to the right resource at the right time, at the right level, is to listen for systemic issues and issues that could be showing trends where there may be a problem. And an example of that might be if she and I are both getting visitors from one area or one school where there's an issue that's just been coming again and again. That's something that we can discuss and try to bring and elevate to administration to see if, and make a recommendation to see if someone can look into that. That's always tricky, and that's always done very, very carefully to make sure that we're always protecting the anonymity and confidentiality of our visitors, which of course is a paramount issue for the people who come to see us. And that takes, I think, a level of experience and skill that knowing the institution requires. And that's something that we're always doing and navigating to see if we can help without violating any of our terms and conditions. So we provide a lot of different services in the office. So as I said, listening is one of them, and coaching. Facilitation is something that we've been doing on an increasing basis. So if someone comes in and they want to have a conversation, let's say with that peer who's got behaviors that are disruptive within the workspace, but they don't want to engage the manager, or they don't want to engage HR because it's not something that maybe reaches that level, we can have a facilitated conversation. And in that case, we will meet with the individuals and then have them come in. And with us as facilitators, we make sure that everyone's being heard and feeling heard, and that people are hearing what's actually being said and not what they think is being said. And we find that that's been very successful. Not, I guess, exclusively, but it usually is. We do presentations to departments, divisions, units, schools, orientations, to advise people of the services of the office and some of the resources that we provide through our website, which might even mitigate the need to come into the office if someone can find the answers in resources and links that we have on our website. We also do customized workshops for different organizations and groups, so that if someone would like a workshop on difficult conversations or bystander training or things like that, we'll either conduct those ourselves or we'll direct those requests to places within the university that are doing those types of things maybe better than we can. So we'll partner with different organizations and different resources at the university to bring the best program that we can to those individuals. So moving forward, we have various tools and resources that we use when we're meeting with individuals or when we're doing a presentation or a workshop. And I'm just going to show you a couple of those today that we find are very helpful for setting a framework, identifying a template, or getting shared language for people to discuss their concerns and their issues. So this chart is one of them, where it really just makes concrete some of the common causes of routine conflict. So when there's a difference in perceptions or needs, confusion of needs and wants, whether there are feelings and emotions, sometimes just going down this chart, it helps you recognize that the person you're in conflict with might be experiencing a very strong emotion of sadness or frustration or fear that you didn't recognize to be emotion and you saw as maybe manipulation or a malevolence, sorry. So sometimes that just helps people to realize, wow, this really isn't about me. Maybe it's about their emotion. Maybe it's about something that's happening with them. So we find that this chart has been helpful for individuals. Another useful chart, and one of my favorites, this was created by Howard Gadlin, the former ombudsman, Dr. Howard Gadlin at the National Institute of Health. And this chart, I think, very clearly and simply identifies how a simple problem can escalate from the top left to the lower right, from a simple problem that's easy to solve down to war. And again, I find this chart to be very helpful for individuals to figure out, where am I on this continuum? Where am I in this process? And, am I dealing with a simple problem, or am I dealing with another person who is at war with me? And when you get down to that lower right, you see that there's not a very clear-eyed or focused intention on solving the problem at hand, but there's emotional volatility. And one of the sort of contexts that we use to look at this is, if you look at level 1, a problem, 2 individuals are maybe reserving the same classroom, and they both arrive at the same time, and they can't both work in the same classroom at the same time. So it's a quick problem. How can we solve it? One of us needs to go to another room. Okay, let's find another room. Let's call someone who does the room assignments, figure this out. We're both hopeful. we're both being very direct. Yeah, she gave me this room yesterday. Oh, I had reserved it Monday. Okay, we have a problem. And really, we know we're reasonable people. We're going to work this out. And if you look at that same situation, but after time and has maybe hardened people, and it's a war, I'm walking into that classroom and there's no way that I'm going to be the one who's leaving because this isn't happening to me again, and for whatever reason. And my goal is that I'm going to not move. I'm going to eliminate you from this room. And you'll see how if I'm thinking that this is a hopeful problem and the other person has dug roots in that room, how a conflict can flare. And think about it in terms of a parking spot, right? What's a problem and when does it turn to war? And you can see how problems can turn to war pretty quickly. So this is just a fun chart that I think is very helpful. The next series of slides really look at disruptive dynamics and the disruptive conduct continuum from an academic perspective. And this was created by the three people at the bottom of the slide, Butterfield, Goodstein, and Shaming. And this was I obtained this at a CASH conference, which stands for Colloquium on Abrasive Conduct in Higher Education. And it's a group of academic, whether they're academic personnel from presidents of universities down to ombuds and HR professionals with provosts, deans, faculty, trying to really get at this issue of abrasive conduct within the academy and how it impacts individuals, departments, schools, and universities. And we'll see as we go through that it can be very helpful, again, to see where am I in this. So when you've got a disruptive person, let's think about in an academic meeting, it starts out where they're rolling their eyes at everybody else, like, can you believe this person is saying this? Dismissive gestures, ignoring. Those are the early signs. Let's get to the extreme side. You've got a disruptive person. They're publicly criticizing the other person. They're humiliating them about their appearance or their work ethic or the type of academic credentials that they have, name calling. So you'll see how letting things that start out early and are irritating and annoying, when they get to the extreme, it's a process and it's a slow process. And then you're at a point where it's harder to address. So this is how this looks for the person, what the person who's the disruptive person. And then let's talk about the target or the person that they're really focusing on. Initially, it's anger and hurt. Why is this person doing this? Embarrassment, feeling helpless in a meeting where no one stands up for you and someone is speaking badly. And then when it's extreme, what that looks like in the workplace. Moving on, because I know where time is getting short. What this looks like within the work unit or the department. Coalitions, people leaving, low productivity. And for the organization. And when you look at the extreme, that's where, we've got a lot more formal complaints. You've got a lot more lawsuits. This is viewed as the culture in the organization. So this, again, is a chart that we find is very helpful to put things into a context, to give people shared language, to get a sense for individuals of where am I? Is this as bad as this, or is this as good as that? So getting ready to wrap up, at our office, we maintain a lending library of all sorts of conflict negotiation, conflict resolution, self-help books. And you can look on our website and people in the Columbia community and see what we have. Come on over, borrow a book, return it when you can. And these are some topics that we have found are very helpful. Sometimes we can't help direct anyone, but we can give them a book to maybe, again, give them some shared language, give them some ways to process the experience that they're having, and to maybe get some tips for how to resolve their concerns. So this is our Ombuds team, and if you're a Columbia employee, student, or affiliate, these are the people that you would encounter at the Columbia University Ombuds office. And I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Hi, Joan. Thank you so much for that very informative presentation and conversation. It stimulated so many comments and questions for me. So maybe we can just do a little bit and then open it up and give people a chance to write in their questions. On the slide where you talked about common topics, or on the slides where you showed that model, either from Gatlin or from the other Disruptive Dynamics, I'm just curious if you can give an example of what you actually did, staying confidential, of course, for any of these things. So for example, in the common topics, there's a whole list under faculty and staff and a list under students. So what are some typical kinds of things you or Marilyn would do as an intervention? Like,
okay, great question. Let's say something serious where they consider that they are potentially being subjected to gender bias and discrimination. If someone feels that that's happening, we will direct them to their HR officer. The Columbia has a central HR office. They can go to someone in central HR if they're not comfortable going to their local HR representative. We'll direct them to the Office of Equal Opportunity and talk about what that would do. We would direct them to, if they're a student, to the Office of Gender-Based Misconduct. And sometimes an individual will say, I don't know if that's really what I want to do, or I don't know which of those I would like to go to. We also have a compliance hotline at the university, so if you want to anonymously officially report something to the university, that's a way to do that as well. We'll recommend use of that. And let's say that the individual says, thank you very much, and they leave, and we don't know whether they are going to file. If we get another individual from the same work unit or the same area, and let's say we have a few people, I might go to the head of that unit or the next level up and say, can you talk to me about this area? And I might ask them to give me information. If they say, well, we have some concerns about that area, or they might not, I might say, I might recommend some training in that area, or I might recommend training in 3 different areas and say, I can't tell you which one of these needs it, but do it in these 3 because one of them specifically needs it. So we'll try to intervene at the level that we think is the most appropriate. If someone is looking for a promotion and they think that they deserve a promotion and they think that they've done the work, we'll help them as they craft their pitch to their supervisor, and we'll sort of be that that ear, listening, objective ear, listening for tone, and whether the people are coming up with non-emotional reasons for the promotion, or whether they have the kind of backup that they might need to walk in and do that. With students, advisor concerns is often a topic that repeats frequently. So how to talk to your advisor. If you're not getting along with your advisor, who else you can speak to, how to bring it, do you, what level of risk are you willing to step into? And if you're low risk, how to present your issue in a way that won't escalate it further or won't ignite defensiveness in another person. So we'll sort of direct them or aid them in having the conversation, or try to maybe sometimes even encourage them to do the official reporting by explaining the non-retaliation policies and things like that. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, great. And so another question I had was, you say that you explain to people like the role of the ombuds, and I think that for some people it's hard to understand sometimes. I've just seen I'm not saying only in Columbia University, but ombuds' role in different organizations that I've worked with, that sometimes people expect more of the ombuds office than they do expect, for example, advocacy. And if confidentiality is one of the principles by which you function, then it's hard to be an advocate, right, when you are respecting confidentiality. So how do you clarify with people? I'll just give an example. So sometimes people say, okay, I went to the ombuds and nothing was done, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of a comment, because there's an expectation that the ombuds office would do something, whatever that something is. And it's not necessarily that that person will do something, but that the ombuds office will do something. So how do you address some of those misconceptions about your role and the office's role?
Yeah, and it's funny because one of the things that we have on our printed materials that we do, in addition to listening and coaching and all of those things, is managing expectations. And I find that one of the first things that we need to do is manage the expectations of what our office can and will do. And that is definitely an issue. And I think the people who are most disappointed when something can't be done are the people who have the expectation that the Ombuds office will solve the problem. And unfortunately, that's just not our role. Sometimes we can play that role, but it's usually behind the scenes, and only after we can aggregate information sufficiently so as to protect that confidentiality. And there are individuals who will come to the office and say, I'll waive that confidentiality. You can call the president. I want you to speak to the president about this. And it just doesn't work that way, because yes, the confidentiality is a critical component. But I see the 4 pillars of our office as equally important. So yes, the confidentiality is important, but so is the independence and the neutrality, as is the informality. So it's a challenge, I'll say, Beth, for sure.
And just one more question. So now that you can look back on the 5 years you've been here, what do you think has been going really well, and what do you think continues to be or is a challenge for you and your office?
I think the main challenge is making sure that individuals are aware of our office's existence. I think the inherent problem with an office like ours is that people see it as a place to go when you have a problem. So when you don't have a problem, your awareness of it seems to fade, and you're not looking for where to go. And so even if you were told at orientation, say, this is a resource for people when they want to untangle an issue, when you have that issue, it doesn't come jumping to mind. So I think just letting people know, because a lot of people come to us after they've had the conversation and handled it badly, or after they've sort of stepped into something that they wouldn't otherwise have wanted to. So I guess awareness is one of our biggest challenges. Well, I think what's going well is that despite the fact that everybody doesn't know about us, a lot of people do, and we have a little survey that we ask people if they're interested in filling out anonymous when they're leaving our office. And, almost uniformly, people are saying that they found it helpful, even just to have someone to listen to. So I've been very pleased with the last 5 years, and the fact that in 5 years, we've increased usage of our office by, I think it's about 60%. 59, 60%. So we're spreading the word, and we have a great team. So I think probably the best thing that's happened in the 5 years is that we've got a wonderful team of professionals who are dedicated to making Columbia a better place, individual by individual.
That's great. It's good to hear that people like the fact that it's a place where they can go and be listened to, because that, I find, one of the foundational issues that people have is they don't know where to go, and they feel not listened to, and they feel unheard.
Yeah, and it's our job to do that. And I'm not going to say that we're perfect or that it works perfectly every time, but we are definitely devoted and dedicated to upholding the standards of the IOA, the integrity of the office, and our own integrity. And we're very proud to work here at Columbia, and really hope that we can, together with the individuals in our office, make it a really great place to live, to work, and learn.
Great. So now I'll just look at one of the questions that somebody wrote in, and somebody's asking why 40% graduate students and 10% undergrad?
Great question. My theory on that is we have a lot of graduate students, first of all. They're in a different stage in their lives. They're older. They're more willing to recognize a conflict. They're here for a longer time, so they have a longer time to sort of have relationships start and degrade, and they are more reliant on their advisor, and sort of that one-on-one relationship, when it starts to feel uncomfortable, has very large implications for their career. I also think that undergraduates just tend to have more resources in their sort of in their work, their view, right, at any given time. I mean, they've got RAs in their dorms. They've got academic advisors that are very present. So I think that's the reason, but I could be wrong.
That kind of makes sense too. And I think also that we just have a much larger number of graduate students also, than undergrads at the campus. I was going to ask another question here. So I'm curious about the whole element of time, right? So when people come to your office, they're already in a situation where they're hurting, or they feel a need for some attention, some kind of intervention. And there are different amount of steps that need to go, that you or they need to go through, or that the system, like the university, needs to go through, and so on. And during that whole time, there might be fear of retribution if there's some kind of action taking place, or for the person who came to register the issue may also feel like, time it's taking so long for something to happen. And sometimes it does take whatever we would call a long time to really have a more serious intervention. So any thoughts or reflections you have about the whole role of what time plays in trying to resolve these issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's so individual, right? So you get planners who come in and say, look, I'm looking at, next fiscal year, and I'd like a promotion within the next 14 months, and they're coming at you with this, incredibly long range strategy. And then you get people who come in and they say, I think my supervisor isn't very happy with me. And you say, well, what makes you say that? And they say, well, I have a meeting with HR tomorrow. I've got my third written warning, and I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's where we have to say, well, it's quite possible that you might be terminated, right? So, or I was just terminated. What do I do, right? And they chose not to, or weren't aware that they could come to us sooner than that. So every individual, their own sense of urgency is very different. So you could have 3 individuals on the same day enter our office with a similar problem, and one sees it as an emergency, one sees it as an emerging issue, and one sees it as, what do you think about this, right? So the issue of time is always very challenging, because what is an emergency to one person might not be to another, and might not be the same as what we would look at as an emergency.
Good. I'm just encouraging all the listeners here to please feel free to write in a question for us as we continue to chat. We have a little less than 15 minutes left. So another question I have here, and interesting to hear your reflections on, is in the NECR program, one of the core principles or practices that we work on is the whole role of self-awareness, and the fact that it's a lifelong learning process, and that depending on who you're interacting with and the nature of the interaction and the context and all of that, you learn something new about yourself, you learn something new about the other person. In my experience working in the field is that very often people are not necessarily aware of their role in the conflict dynamic. And so it's very much a look what this person did to me or the system's doing to me. And it feels like the person is victimized, right? So the person sees himself or herself through the lens of being a victim rather than a co-contributor to the dynamic. So I'm just wondering, any reflections you have on how your office might, or do you do anything that might help people also understand some of their contribution to the dynamic that might create conflict?
Absolutely. And that's, a big part of the conversations that we have. And we'll, explore that with individuals. And sometimes people will come in and they'll have a very strongly held opinion that they believe is factual, right? So we'll challenge that and we will say, what do you base that? Or is it possible that the university or your manager or your peer is looking at it this way? Or a way, I'll say another way that, I hear your story, but I can also hear the story being written or told this way. What do you think about that? And sometimes that helps someone to identify that they're looking at it without some clarity or awareness of their own role. And sometimes I will be as direct as, I feel comfortable to say, I think what you're missing here might be, or when you stated that you did this or that, that may have contributed. And sometimes those people leave very angry. They don't feel that it was helpful because we might have challenged the way that they were looking at things, and they were just looking for someone to say, yes, that is the way you're looking at it is accurate. And we're not generally going to do that, right? We're neutrals, and we try to be and say, if that's what you've experienced, here are some options. But it's also possible that your manager might have experienced it from this direction. Since they're the manager and they have the support of HR, presumably, your way might not prevail. And what's the option if that happens? So we'll try to help them prepare for that next step if that self-awareness either doesn't come or has come too late.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I have another question is, I was just looking at the Disruptive Dynamics charts, and I also see like department level. And I start to think about the managers at that department level. And I'm thinking about my work as an organizational consultant. And when I get called in, one behavior that happens on the managerial level is people tend to ignore or avoid any kind of disruption or disturbances or conflicts because they don't necessarily feel skilled enough and it's overwhelming and they don't know what to do. So one course of action is do nothing. And so then, of course, doing nothing just allows the conflict to fester and to grow and so on. So what advice or recommendations do you have for managers and maybe even manager development programs and so on around this area?
Well, that's such an important component to stopping the cycle, right? Is having someone who has the leadership and the accountability to step in and address a thorny situation. And I think what happens in a lot of institutions is that managers are not given the authority or do not use the authority that they're given in a way that demonstrates that level of leadership. And if they're incapable of doing that, is when employees within that unit can suffer. And that's a very real situation that is encountered day after day. And I don't know what the solution to that is, except having each level of management be very, very clear as to what the expectations are, and how a person can demonstrate leadership is by stepping in and seeking the help that they need. So the manager who says, I don't know what to do, I'm going to pretend that this isn't happening, needs to know that there are many resources here at the university to get that kind of leadership guidance and support. So, and one of that ways is to come to our office, because you might not want to say to your manager, your own manager, hey, I don't know how to manage this situation. You can come to our office and we can point you in the right direction, help with untangling individual issues, or provide resources to try to untangle it yourself with books and other ways.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you made also about the fact that the manager may not want to show that he or she is not feeling competent in being able to do that to his or her manager, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
then that might be a judgment on their abilities as a manager. Right. Yeah. Okay, we have another question here. So Joan, thank you for the information. Can Teachers College employees visit your Ombuds office? Thanks.
So Teachers College has an Ombuds, and I'm sorry his name is escaping me at this second. If a Teachers College employee or student has a concern that relates to a Columbia University student or employee or system, then yes, they can come to our office. So if it relates to Columbia, then you are considered an affiliate. If it has something to do directly with someone who is employed by Teachers College, then there is a Teachers College Ombuds. And if you want to know who that is, you can probably call Jamie in my office, and I think she has the information at her fingertips right now.
Great. And does that apply also for people from the other affiliate schools like Barnard and Union and Jewish Theological?
Yeah, so Barnard has an Ombuds for students and a separate Ombuds for staff and faculty. And it's the same situation. So if if a Barnard student has an issue relating to a faculty member, and it's a Columbia faculty member, then that student can definitely come to our office. Union, I don't believe has an Ombuds, so yeah, they'd be welcome. Not an employee, but a student who's in our joint program could come, or who's having a problem with one of our students, I would imagine.
Somebody wrote in that Stephen Peverly is TC's Ombuds.
That's it. Thank you. Yes, I knew it was Stephen. I didn't want to say his name without the other. Yes. So he's served in that role for about a year or two now. He took over for someone who had been doing it for a long time, and he's the person that you can go see. Yep.
Great.
Thank you for that.
And just maybe one more question here. We have a little bit of time. I'm curious, how do you figure out where the line gets drawn about what might be more legal action? Because I know here, for example, in one of your common topics might be financial issues. What if there are financial misappropriations, or what if there really is discrimination and abuse and so on? How do you determine which course of action to take in those situations?
So we don't give legal advice at the Ombuds office. If someone comes in and says outright, I believe I'm being discriminated against, then we will direct them to those offices that address that. If someone tells their story and it revolves around, say, gender or religion, and they're saying, basically, because I am this, they are treating me like this. We will recommend that one of the places that they can go to discuss this is one of the offices that will look at this from the perspective of whether local, state, or federal law is being violated. In terms of, if someone says, I think I work in a lab and I believe that there could be problems with how grant money is being spent, we will direct them to the offices that would most appropriately investigate that. So sometimes we get people who come in and say, how do I sue my landlord? So we've got a resource on our website, legal resources. So where to get information about whether something is a legal issue or not, or how to talk to a lawyer for free here in New York City to see if you're on the right track. So we'll try to address it that way, but people often come and think that they can get legal advice at the Ombuds office, but that is not what we do.
All righty, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to say based on the questions you've heard so far, or anything from our conversation that you may want to add?
Well, I would just like to add, for anybody who's listening, who's in industry or in another institution that doesn't have an Ombuds office, it's a resource that I think, of course, I think our office is great, right? But I think the resource is absolutely fantastic. And from my own evolution of my career, I started out in litigation and I did trial work for almost 25 years. And I kept trying to find a way to keep moving it back to get to a point before it became a federal case, right? So mediation, arbitration, collaborative law, if you're not familiar with the concept, it's trying to keep things out of the courts. And Ombuds is the perfect opportunity for me to be able to talk to people and, before something gets to that level, to maybe resolve it easier and cheaper and more completely and without all of that just agita, right? So I think it's a great place. So if you've got people who are students in your program and are going out to be CEOs someday, really think about an Ombuds office, because I think it's a beautiful component of the risk management process. And in doing so, it empowers individuals. And I don't think that can go bad if it's done right.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that comes to the end of our session. Thank you, Joan, for all your time and great points. Really appreciate it and enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and my team,
Sure.
My entire team thanks you.
Thank you to the entire team. And Andy?
And yeah, thanks for everyone for participating in our webinar this afternoon. As a reminder, the webinar has been recorded and will be made available to you online in probably the next few days, possibly early next week. Should you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to either Beth or Joan or myself, and we'll be happy to provide you with additional information as needed. So thank you and have a wonderful day.